Prosperity in Black America. What will this require? Is Black business prospering? Are we reaching women and minority-owned businesses? How do we achieve earning parity for wealth for our families? Do our children really have access to education? Will our families have choices for our children? Prison pipelines, mass incarceration, tearing our families apart. A healthcare system not accessible to the masses. The disproportionate termination of Black women from corporate America. When will we actually begin to address what's really at play? How do Black people gain more power to help make these changes? This requires a lot of political will and courage. I'm that provocateur of change. I am Cindi Bright. Welcome to HeartBeat.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to HeartBeat. I am your host, Cindi Bright. Thank you for joining this evening. Bear with me as I have a little bit of a cough going on again here. Thank you for joining. Today is 9/11, September the 11th. Where were you 23 years ago on this date? I woke up this morning thinking about that because I'll tell you where I was. So 23 years ago, I was the head of HR for the federal and international government affairs for Weyerhaeuser Company. I was ran HR for that group, and it was kind of my first introduction to politics. I didn't know it at the time. I mean, that I would take such an interest in the political world, being that the entire department was pretty much Republicans. But I was on my way as their head of HR. We were heading to take the charter plane up to Canada because we were getting ready to have a strategic planning session. And it's a session I would normally lead on that day before it got canceled. And it's where the broader business had made some decisions about its roadmap that Weyerhaeuser was going to have at the time for what we were going to do over the next 3 to 5 years. What's done in that regard is each organization then within the businesses would then take that roadmap, and each business had these sessions where we aligned our organization with the roadmap. Now, bringing that up, I thought it was an important thing to add today or to talk about a little bit because I'm like reliving it right now with what we saw in last night's debate with Vice President Kamala Harris, because the only criticism that pundits have about her is that she doesn't have a plan. She, in fact, does. And I think many people don't understand how it actually works when a new chief executive takes over an organization. So bear with me as this is kind of a learning moment for folks who want to criticize. When the vision is determined by an organization, they don't go down into the weeds per se. Each department head takes the goals, the strategy, and figures out what each organization needs to do within that broader business for what they need to do to align themselves with that goal. That's what she's doing. And she's done a remarkable job as far as I'm concerned, because I've never seen a chief executive come on board in less than 90 to 100 days and have an actual roadmap developed on where she want to take the organization. And it's because it's the only thing they have to pick her apart, because she slayed last night, in my opinion. And I just wanted to start there tonight because when I'm watching that debate, or when I watch particularly how Black women are treated and talked about or picked apart, it's always something that no one else has to actually do. She's being held to standards that don't exist for other people. So we can start there. Joining me this evening again is co-hosts Erin Jones and Stefani Coverson. I know we have a lot to talk about this evening. Welcome, ladies, this evening, because I know we were all glued to the TV last night watching this. And I decided to start the show that way today because I thought it'd be important to talk about kind of the bigger picture for her and what she's trying to do, um, coming out of the chute, if you will. But maybe we start from there, or we start from the handshake when she decided to walk over and pronounce her name correctly to him. And I don't know, where do you guys want to start tonight about how to have this conversation about what we witnessed last night?
Oh, I don't mind starting out with that piece because I think that uh, Donald Trump thought that, he was going to use his, 48 laws of power, whatever, and try to ignore her. And so I don't think that he expected her to walk across the stage and shake his hand and say, let's have a good debate. Um, and and I think that she did a great job of taking authority. Like right from that moment, she was confident, she was focused, and she threw down the gauntlet. Like, you will learn how to pronounce my name, and you won't play in my face tonight, keyboard warrior.
Yeah, I think too, we are always expected to play nice, both as women and as Black women. There's a way that we are expected to play nice, and I love that she just started out by, I'm going to set the rules here. I'm going to set the expectations here, and even when you're rude, I'm going to stay calm, and I'm going to stay collected, and I'm going to stay grace filled, and yeah, I think how we start is really critical. So how she started was really critical. I also want to go back to something you said before we were on stage, though. I have heard far too many people expect her to have this fleshed out plan when she's having been a leader in a school space. It takes at least 90 days in a school space, as you said, in business, to come out with any kind of meaningful plan. So here's another thing that we're expected to do. We're expected to go above and beyond what other people do. And she couldn't afford to just throw together a crap plan. She couldn't afford to do that. She has to do everything 10 times better than everybody else. And I think, I know we'll talk about this later, but the fact that he's had 8 years to come up with a health plan, and all he has is the concept of a plan,
The
but yet
concept.
she is supposed to have like all the details to every element of her plan on a website, all laid out.
It's why,
And
it's why I wanted to start there, because that is where every chief executive starts. I mean, in all the years that I've been inside of these organizations, they um, they do uh, they do come out at 30,000 foot. That's the corporate
right.
terminology, but you come out at this level, and and the fact that she's even named things different, that whole opportunity economy, we know what she's
We
thinking with
know.
that, and where she's heading with it. What she can't do, to your point, Erin, is she's not going to dictate, pardon the pun there, she's not going to dictate what each of these departments need to do to align. She's setting the direction and the vision. And she's done that. And when you look at her website, she's done that quicker than, to your point,
Hmm.
than anybody else. And yes, she cannot afford to have a wrinkle in anything. Steph, I like, your comment about, the command and the presence. Like you know, she had to be the bigger person in this regard. And she'll have to stay at that fray her entire presidency. Um, should she be blessed, or should we be blessed that she gets elected into that seat, because she can't afford to behave the way her opponents are. And it was on clear display that there were double standards happening in that room last night. You
Mhm.
picked up on those standards as well?
So I want to name something that I'm sitting with because I'm like highly irritated about it. It's the deference to white men. It's the absolute deference to white men. I blame the media. I blame the Republican Party. Um, and what I mean by this deference, right, is this idea that at face value,
Mhm.
um, the media, the Republican Party continues to poo-poo this man's absolute unhingedness, uh, lack of basic qualifications and acumen. And to your point of this individual being a CEO, starting out the conversation about that 60, 90, 120 plan. Um, I'm sorry, isn't he a CEO? Like, wasn't that his claim to fame? And so, shouldn't he know these things? And I just wonder, for the amount of time that the media has spent on questioning where uh, Vice President Kamala Harris's policies were, whether or not she's Black enough or Black at all. And when she spoke in AAV to people, like if they would have used the same energy towards Donald Trump, we might have his income tax returns.
Mhm.
We might know why and how the Kushners got $2 billion from the Saudis. We might know about the suitcase full of money in that the Egyptians government allegedly gave to him. We might have some policy answers. But the thing is, no, because he's full of bluster and smoke and is such a bully, the people that are responsible for being the critical inquirers on behalf of the American people have been asleep at the wheel. And now that this Black woman steps into this space, that's all they talk about. And if you look at like that, she doesn't have a plan, right? And is she ready? Is she qualified? Um, when she has taken all the steps, she's been elected at the local level, the state level, the federal level twice. Like she is the most qualified presidential candidate that we have
Ever.
seen in our lifetimes and ever. And so they're treating her like she's never held an office in government before the presidency, or that she's only been a US senator for 18 months.
It's yes, and because it's not just the media. I mean, he's been even in the I mean, I'm saying the same things about the judicial system with him, right? Like it's the same, that his cases, I mean, your point's well taken about um, the indifference to white men and they're not being held accountable. And his court dates keep getting pushed back. His sentencing, one of the things I had said a couple of days ago on my TikTok is that it's just so frustrating to sit and watch how nothing is applicable to him. And I, comment about, I wonder if this is God's way of highlighting, if you will, just how far, wide, and deep this system is that is protecting the fact that we have a rapist, a 34 convicted felon, even on the ticket, who's getting the privilege of the mic being turned back on, even though the rules said your mic is off. They turned it back on for him when he was spouting after. Like it's embedded into every person's behavior in society. That, I mean, do you watch it like when I'm in a restaurant or when I walk someplace and a white man comes over and interrupts a conversation at a serving and they immediately turn away and go help them while I'm standing? Like, how many times does this happen in every facet of society? And so, yeah, your point is right on about, she is held to a different standard, and will be, if she wins.
Can I share some notes that I took
Yeah.
on just
Yes.
the difference between men and women and
Mhm.
the double standard? I took
Mhm.
notes on this today. So there's a double standard for what's acceptable and expected for good and effective leadership. Men are automatically assumed to be better leaders. And I
Mm-hmm.
experienced this in my race for office, that he was just assumed to be already qualified, even though
Mm-hmm.
I had been a teacher much longer and in education. Men can be aggressive and angry and loud, and that's considered strong. When women do that, they're considered to be the B word and angry, especially Black women. Women have to be likable, but not too likable or too pretty. Can't be too pretty. Hillary Clinton was perceived as unlikable, and so it was a no, even for people who agreed with her policy. She was unlikable. Kamala Harris has had to do the delicate dance between being confident and personable. Men can be cocky and arrogant, and that's seen as a strength. Women must be confident, but definitely not too confident, because confident is perceived as cocky, and cocky in women is not acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
So those are just some of the thoughts that I had around the different expectations that we have for men and women in leadership roles. And she had to do that really delicate dance last night in front of people. And the thing I was thinking about, even watching her last night, is world leaders are watching her. So
Mm-hmm.
she's very aware that last night was about more than just the American people. It was about, I mean, Putin. I don't know if you saw Putin X'd out that his name was mentioned so much by both candidates. Don't throw me in this, but she knew that Putin was going to be watching, and Viktor Orban would be watching, and all the Middle Eastern leaders were watching to see how she shows up, and so she had to that delicate dance that is necessary for those of us who are in leadership roles.
Some important things that you just highlighted and just it triggered me because that is the world I live in too, right? You're to this or you're not enough that. If you're, yeah, it's a thing. And the dance that we as women, the dance that we as Black women, the dance that we as, she's light skinned and pretty and smart and educated and all the things that you would think make her, here can feel like a ball and chain around her neck because she's having to walk that dance, and it is an exhausting line to walk. Uh,
Mhm.
and the I can just imagine where we call it the backlash comes from, because that recipe comes every direction at her. You know that, right? Like
Mhm.
every direction.
Mhm. I
And
want
it's
to.
why we need a support system. It's why we need each other, right? It's why we need each other to hold each other up. It's why she needs her husband and her family, because you can't do this stuff by yourself and survive and live through it.
Absolutely not. And I just want to piggyback, Erin, off your comments, because I want to. These are not just your opinions. Like, I know that you took down notes, right? But this, it's ways of knowing, right? So even though we might not be running for, president or elected office, speaking broadly, as women and particularly as Black women, we know these unwritten rules. And so I just want to highlight two studies. So the first is this study that basically examined whether or not distinction disguises discrimination. And so this study was all about examining the role of racism and sexism in CEO success. And what the researchers found when they looked at how the companies were doing that were led by these CEOs and then broke them down by race and gender, they found that women of color tended to be the best CEOs with the best performing organizations. And then at the end of the chain were the white male CEOs. And what they state the reason is that the more discrimination and sexism that you face, like, you don't get to pull up into the position and get to be hired on potential, right? You don't, because you talk a good game. You don't get that benefit. And so you have women of color who are tested by fire, in essence. And so they don't just get into these positions on a wing and a prayer. Like you have to prove your performance versus being hired on promise and potential. The other thing, to your point around how you cannot be angry or too emotional, is that there actually was a study published in the Harvard Business Journal, but originally published in Psychological Science, where basically they found that expressions of anger um, demonstrate like competence and high status, but only for men.
Man.
So when male job applicants who expressed anger during the interview process were more likely to be hired and given more responsibility,
Strengths.
and power and autonomy in their jobs. But when women expressed anger, because again, it runs counter to what and how women have been socialized and expected to behave, it decreases the woman's status and being viewed as competent, right? So, like all of these arguments in the national discourse that people are just, playing the race card and the sex card or the combination of the two, like what we are talking about is backed in research and study after study after study.
One of the things that stood out to me also was, well, I picked up on some things that were being talked about in the media today about how he was briefed, but clearly he didn't read his brief. And, I mean, we joke about this, but about does he even read? Um, he quoted a book, Run, Spot, Run. The book was actually See, Spot, Run. I don't know if you caught that. I remember that book as a child. It's called See, Spot, Run. But when he said that, the instant thing I thought of is that's a basic kindergarten book. And that um, former president didn't even know a child's book. And so, I'm kind of being a little facetious, but it's kind of your point, Steph, about from the package that he brings to the table versus a woman of color, a Black woman. There's never, I mean, I have watched it my entire career. They're not the same. And so, what is going to be fascinating to watch, and I don't want to jinx this before it actually gets out the chute. But in an opportunity economy, when you start talking about those who are most qualified should have the opportunity, the first opportunity, that's going to game change that whole issue around white men having access, direct access to every opportunity that comes out, because they have not kept up. They've come in through the bro plan, not the pro plan, right? So we focus on our professional life and enhancing ourselves and our education and knowledge and all those things, whereas they just call their bros, and their bros get them into those jobs, and that's how this works. It's too bad we as women don't have more of that same pattern of like we need to break that barrier and bring our sisters along with us regardless, also to help break that concrete ceiling that's there. And we'll have to do some of that to start getting people into positions of power to make these changes that she's going to want to make. Is going to require some very valiant and bold actions, and it's going to require creative thinking and balls busting, right? Telling these guys no, right? I mean, he wasn't even fit to be on the same stage as her. Like he wasn't even in this. He's not even fit to be on the same stage as her. Someone like her.
And he now could no longer hide behind Joe Biden, right? So the media was so focused on Joe Biden, and Joe Biden stuttered. Joe Biden forgot this person's name, Sleepy Joe, right? he could no longer hide behind the media's attack on Joe Biden. So I feel like we saw him stripped bare, like the emperor had no clothes last night. Um, and so I want to just say I am glad that the moderators turned his microphone back on, even though
She
that's
wanted that.
not
She wanted
supposed to
that.
either. She wanted that. And also we got to see how absolutely unhinged this
Yeah.
former president is.
that was my favorite part
That was
of
my
the
favorite part.
entire debate.
Because we all knew. We all knew what fit in that space.
Well, yeah, I love that too. And here's the other thing that I was thinking. Just I didn't watch the debate between he and Biden, but there's a difference between him winning, and I think he thought he won. He didn't win. Biden lost that debate, right? So he back to being cocky and arrogant. He was so cocky and arrogant. He is so cocky and arrogant that I believe his advisors tried to advise him the best they could, but he is so convinced that he knows everything, that he's got it all in the bag, that I don't think it matters how many hours you do debate prep with. I doubt he took a lot of hours because I'm sure he said to everybody, I already got this. See, I had Biden. She's just a black woman. I got this. I'm sure that's how he proceeded into that debate. And that cocky, I think so. The person that just said it's all validating is my sis down here in Lacey. And one of the things we were talking about today is how can you watch that debate as someone who plans to vote for him and in good conscience say, like, this is the person who should be leading us all. Like I am still really, I'm struggling with, because I know smart people. I know people that have PhDs who are still supporting Donald Trump. I know wealthy people. I know people that are really kind people who I went to church with who are still supporting Donald Trump. And after watching that, why is this close?
Why do you think, like we were chatting briefly before we came on air about, I mean, we all know that Vice President Harris is going to win the popular vote. That's not going to be what determines this election, right? She has to. And so those were some of my thoughts. I mean, I had said it on TikTok a couple of days ago. It's like she basically has to win enough electoral votes in 2 of the states. I mean, that's what she's already proven. I mean, she's more than qualified, but you still got folks. I mean, what more can she do? What more can you do when you've checked all of the boxes and some? And I could make an argument that she wasn't actually baiting him last night. She was just a professional self. It's that he's so inferior in terms of competency that he just doesn't even have a skill set to be able to have a conversation with another professional person, let alone a debate, right? Like, so what
Do
is
you
it?
follow Joshua Doss on TikTok?
No.
You both should. He's a black guy who used to work for her actually, and now he's a pollster. Oh, Joyce, that's one of my students. Yay. He's a pollster now. But he came out with, so he used to debate coach. So he used to prep candidates for debates, and he came out today on a TikTok with this message. He said she was on point. If you go back and listen to her now on every single question, she gave a piece of her biography. She gave evidence of
I
progress that
saw.
she and Biden have made. She gave contrast, and then she laid some bait. And some of the bait early on was a little softer, and then she got later it was much more clear. Kevin Washington, who may be watching this too, who's also in a class that I post, talked about the power of taking command and defining herself, and talking about experiences. But here's why I think often there are still people that can't see. She is a female, and I am hearing way too many men, even our brothers, Can I tell you, I am so disappointed in so many black men right now who just cannot see through the female. They just cannot imagine that a woman could lead, because they've been
Mhm.
so trained that a man has to be the one in charge. In
Mhm.
fact, I had a conversation with a Black man who's an education leader 2 days ago. He called me in the morning and was just really emotional. And he said he's struggling so hard watching some of his brothers who can't let their wives lead, and whose
Mhm.
marriages are falling apart because their wives are becoming principals, they're becoming superintendents, and they just, and he said, I, how did your husband deal with it? And I said, well, oh, it's a work in progress. And we had to go through our struggle. But, so many of even our men have been raised to believe that women shouldn't be in charge. And so I think part of the barrier is people can't see through the woman part, and they can't see through the Black part. And even people who think they're good people have been so trained to believe that we, even Obama, are not enough, that we're not
No,
enough. And no
I
matter
Mhm.
how much we prove.
I recently heard, you are absolutely 100% right on that point, Erin, about our own brothers and how, because I recently heard some comments that was made by a brother running for a big office here that was made against a very accomplished woman here. And all the bros have lined up with him, and I can't stomach it because I'm just so sick of listening to their comments that they make about us, but then they want our help, right? And then they want us to fix all their stuff. And I said stuff. Um, and so we have that hurdle that we have to contend with also.
Mhm.
And
And
so,
not all of them are that way. So if you're a Black man who supports Black women, because I want to give a shout out. Yesterday, I hosted an all-day session with education leaders, and there were 7 Black men, Black and brown men in the room. And 2 of them at the end of the session stood up and said, we are only here because Sister Erin is leading this. And,
mm,
and we just want to give her her flowers now. So a shout out to all you brothers out there that are doing the right thing. Get your brothers. Get your brothers.
get your brothers. Yes, that is a fact.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You said it much, much more eloquently and like politically than I would, because I was just gonna be like racism and sexism, right? The racist and sexist, because there is no way, right? There is no way with all of the information that we have regarding Vice President Harris's qualification and Cheeto Mussolini's qualifications that we know. We know who's qualified, we know who's not. And we can look objectively at the man told the American people to like drink bleach to get rid of COVID,
Or that
right?
your pets, that your cats are being eaten and you're like that stuff to unleash,
Right.
racial hatred. I almost I downloaded these 2 hilarious memes today that I was going to show on the show tonight, and then I decided to not do it, um, because I
But guess
saw it.
what? The children are going to pay for this, though. I know this
Yeah.
because I'm in schools. The children who are immigrants are going to pay for
Okay.
these kinds of comments, right? And so
Mhm.
I didn't laugh when he said that last night, because I'm thinking about all the babies that I'm now going to end up in
Mhm.
school with, because they're now being accused of, are you eating dog food? Are you eating dog? Is that dog in your lunch? The kids who bring their
Mhm.
lunch to school, they already been hearing it. This is just going to
The
feed that
memes I'm referring to are the cats that are behind the wheel of a car driving away to get away
escaping.
from, yeah, escaping.
Right.
So it's much more of a humor. But to your point, I decided to not do it because of the backlash and who it's going to harm, including the Haitians in that community who are having to will have to deal with that, and that's race baiting, this hatred. Again, how is this person even on the same stage competing for the highest chief executive position? um, eh, how is that person even allowed to be there? I mean, he
Yeah.
can't even, I mean, he's a should this former president win, um, he can't even get a security clearance because he's a convicted felon. So how does that even reconcile? How do you reconcile?
And didn't he have to surrender his passport? So, like, how is he gonna go to like the what is it, the G5 summit?
There's a bunch of places countries that won't let him in.
Let him go.
Like, and so, like, back to this idea of like racism and sexism, like the number of people that are willing to cut their own noses off to spite their face. And for example, let's just Black men, you know, Donald Trump wants qualified immunity expanded. So you could be minding your own business, driving to work, the gym, the park, the grocery store, get pulled over by a cop. He beats the shit out of you. He, shoots you, like all of these horrible, horrible things. And this former president believes that that's okay. Like, in order for the police to be able to do their job, that they should just have carte blanche to terrorize the Black community and to terrorize Black men in particular. So we would rather cut off our nose to spite our face, right? Because we can't get past the femaleness, or we can't we can't get past the Blackness.
Yeah.
Well, even similarly,
this is so dangerous.
Can I just take a quick 30-second break? I just want to do a quick ad break, and then we'll pick this back up because I committed to doing that. So let me just do this and we'll be right back.
State Senator Twana Nobles has earned the trust of our community. As a mother with kids in public schools, she understands what working families need to thrive. That means increasing access to financial aid, expanding the working family's tax credit so we can afford to live in our communities, and ensuring Washingtonians continue to have access to abortion. Re-elect Twana Nobles, trusted by the community, the champion we need. Paid for by friends of Twana Nobles.
Okay, welcome back to HeartBeat, everybody. Let me come back in. Steph, I didn't mean to cut you off. I ran over on the half. So
I was so excited to see Twana Nobles, Senator Twana Nobles ad. But this idea of cutting noses off to spite faces, or just even this idea, there's a creator on TikTok who ran all the numbers, like went to the census data, and then pulled people's tax burden based on both of their plans. And so he estimated like a family with 2 kids would pay $4,000 more in taxes under the Trump administration's plan. And so I want to say it's odd, and I'm bemused and confused by it. But for me, I just keep remembering what Lyndon B. Johnson said, right? As long as you give, and he said white people, somebody to look down on, like, we don't have to ask them for their money. Like, they'll turn their pockets inside out to give it up. And I just kind of want to broaden that to anyone who is working through like racism, sexism, the isms, willing to vote against their own interests to keep these people over here down, or to ensure like this person over here doesn't get into power. And it's like drug down with it.
Did you, either of you, see the some of the focus groups that were being held last night during the debate and then after? And did you catch, I don't remember which channel, I was bouncing back and forth between the two, CNN and MSNBC, and there was a group of 5 women, and after all this was all said and done, there was one particular woman who, when asked the question, was she convinced at the end of this on who she was going to vote for? And she still said no. And when she was probed about why, she couldn't even answer the question, because the truth is that there is no intelligent answer for why you wouldn't vote for.
She just doesn't like her.
She doesn't like her.
That's what she said.
And what's inside of her heart is something deeper. It's that hatred that people don't want to confront within themselves. That because there's no other reason why you would look at someone as qualified as she and what she stands for. And she's not a lefty liberal, like the language being attached to it to discourage people to vote for her. To not want to put a Kamala Harris in office is all about your own stuff, and not being able to confront yourself and your own hatred of people who look like her is real. That's how they are able to vote against their interest, because that hatred is so much deeper. Erin, I wanted to ask you about, because I know you started a project, Kindness, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about that and what you're doing, because it's directly tied into what I'm just talking about, because I think what you're aiming to do, because I think it gets at the heart condition of this country. Do you want to speak more?
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah.
So really, this came up 3 weeks ago. I opened a school district that I will not name. Part of the reason they asked me to open, so for all of their staff, all the administrators and bus drivers and front office people, so I had the entire school district in an auditorium. The reason they asked me to come is because they've had so many slurs in hallways in the last 2 years. Really, the last 4 years.
Slurs?
N-word. And this is a school district that has very few Black students in it, but there are so many anti-Black slurs being used in hallways from the elementary to the high school that their superintendent asked if I would come and just address how do we create spaces that are more humanizing. And so I did a talk about that. And then on the way home, I was in the airport and I'm looking at TikTok videos and I'm watching how adults are talking to other adults. And I've spent the last 3 years since the last election, 70% of my work used to be going into schools and doing culturally responsive practice training for teachers. But now 70% of my work in schools is after something's made the news, a slur, some sort of anti-Black, anti-queer altercation has happened. I am sent in to help them fix their culture. But what is really striking me is almost every school I've ever been to, there's an adult who's using that language too. And so we hold kids accountable, but the adults are never held accountable. And then I'm looking at TikTok and I'm watching how people are talking about Kamala Harris. And I'm watching how JD Vance is talking about immigrants. And I'm thinking about all the children that I get to see every year. And 3 weeks ago in class, and I have some of my students are watching right now, I was talking about, what if we were to just make kindness viral? What if we were to, instead of making hate viral, what if we were to make kindness viral? I refuse to just sit back and let hate win. I refuse to sit back. And I know I don't get to control what happens in Israel and Palestine. I don't get to control what happens between Ukraine and Russia. But what I can control is how I show up in space. And what I can do is infect people with a good virus, which is kindness. And kindness is not nice. So I'm not talking about just smiling fakely at people, but it's really showing up to people as if they are equally valuable in the world. And so we started this thing called Project Kindness 2 weeks ago. We've been meeting on Sundays. And my challenge this week to people is use your social media to share a story about something that you've done that was kind. Let's populate social media with stories about kindness. And then I encourage people to write a little note to someone that just tells them how amazing they are. And so I challenge everybody out there, if you're interested, send me a message. I'm on all the social medias. I'm on TikTok at Afro Educator. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram at Erin Jones Dreams. But my goal, my dream is to get 1 million people to sign a kindness pledge. And that we would just commit to random acts of kindness, because I think this election could destroy us, but it could also unite us. And that's what I loved about Kamala's message last night, is I believe she has a message for all of us, not just some of us.
I agree. That's why I connected that your kindness project with what she was saying last night. It was on my mind as I was listening to her, because we do have an opportunity now to each one of us, and I myself, right? Like it has been very difficult to live in this society and have the hatred coming from every direction we turn, and even in spaces that we think that we're safe in, we're not safe. I mean, I'm speaking for in my own world, right? And so, um, I do want to be surrounded by people. It's why I'm in community with the both of you, to have people who love me and care about me and aren't vicious and nasty and mean spirited and all the things that we have to tolerate just to go to the grocery store, right? Just to, so it is important now that every single human start to address themselves, because we can't take this world where we need it to be if we're going to still stay in places of competing against each other and taking her down and talking about her behind her, sabotaging her, stealing her work, all the things that come with. I'm just talking about in women communities, right? So, and that's just
Mhm.
one piece of the equation. And so
Yeah.
here you're talking about our children, and you can watch the workplace has fallen apart from my perspective. I mean, the workplace has fallen apart. It's run away all of the good people. Good people have gone out on their own and have found other ways to make money, and not, yeah. There's just so
And
much.
and I also think though that part of, so yes, the kindness is absolutely important. And empathy, kindness, accountability, all of those pieces, yes, yes, and yes. And I do feel and strongly believe that part of the problem that the schools are experiencing is the overrepresentation of white, heterosexual individuals, back to these ways of knowing,
Mhm.
right? So the adage, just as an example, I can remember in school the first time that I was called the N-word. And when I reported it to the white teacher reminded me that sticks and stones will
May
break your
break your
bones,
bones.
but
Yeah.
names will never hurt you. So this idea of just not having that lived experience, right? Of being referred to as the N word or the F word as it
Yep.
relates to our LGBTQ siblings, or the R word. If you don't have that lived experience, if you don't bear those identities, um, and you're not in community with people, close community with people who have those identities, it's not a big deal. Like, it's bad, but is it world ending? And I think about, like, some of the scars that, like, I'm in my, almost mid-50s, and some of the conversations that I have with some of my friends, that some of the stuff that happened to us even in elementary school,
Mhm.
deeply scarring. Like,
Mhm.
and we're like, we've passed the what is it? The half centennial mark, of our lives. And if that hasn't been your experience, um, or you're not in close community to see the devastation, right, that causes to people, it's really difficult, I think, to hold folks accountable,
Or even to
right?
have empathy.
Even to have
Even to,
empathy, even to, oh, we're just going to give them a stern talking to, right? As opposed to taking real action so that these students know that it's not okay to show up and behave in that way. And the same thing for teachers and administrators, because that's a whole nother thing. Like, some of the comments that I have witnessed, working in a school district, seeing some of the things that folks do and say about staff that don't look like them, teachers that don't look like them, and children that don't look like them.
But let's take that back to Trump, though, because I want to take it back to something that Cindi said earlier. So why are people still voting for Trump? I think this dynamic is playing out in our politics too, in so many ways, right? And so Trump says things about the Haitian immigrants. He says the millions and millions of immigrants coming across our borders who are dirty and violent, and they're bringing drugs and all of those things. And I think so many people who don't have that lived experience, oh, it's just words. He's just being hyperbolic. He's exaggerating. It's not a big deal. But for those of us who inhabit those identities or serve those communities or are in community with that, we understand the danger of those words. And
we saw it in the 80s. Do you remember the first iteration of like racist picking at Haitian people and blaming them for HIV and just all kinds of awful things?
But
it's not, we've seen it bear out.
As an educator, then, I mean, this is what I've been telling people. I cannot vote for Trump purely on that, because as an educator, how do I vote for someone who talks about people in such a dehumanizing way and then go to my students and say, hey, we're going to talk in kind, but I have a different standard for him than I have for you, right? And so for me, how he shows up as our leader of this country says so much about who we are as a country. And I believe we're better than that. I absolutely believe we're better than that. But if you are so removed from those kinds of things, then it's easy to just say, well, he's just joking. It's not a big deal. But I see we have all experienced the consequences of this kinds of behavior.
And it's I can't believe the leopard ate my face.
And, you know, I'm processing what you're saying, Erin, that because I'll just say his demographic. Let's talk about the school shooter that's sitting in court this week and looking at that child, the angle that they had the camera on, you know, from behind. And I was sitting there looking at this child and then seeing the father being brought into the courtroom. And I just can't get my head around, you know, this violence, this anger that is possessed there. But here's the thing. The people who vote for Trump, the women that I was referring to that still had made up their minds, not ever seeing those demographic of people ever be held accountable. The fact that he is allowed to be on the ticket to run for the president of the United States is all you need to know about why people would vote for him, because someone that egregious who was on national TV last night making those comments, who's been prosecuted for rape, who's been robbed people and stolen, you know, millions and cheated people and not paid contractors and all the things that he's done. And he stands in front of you and me and says, I do solemnly swear that I will hold the office of the presidency. And he's telling lies and people believe them. And that's how, so from my perspective, only until they start to get held accountable for their behaviors will things start to shift. Because while they get away with this behavior in the schools, you know, it's the same demographic of young white boys that are shooting up the schools. What's happening in the homes of these children? Why are we not talking about? That's a national epidemic. Why are we not talking about that? It's a crisis.
Because, and so I've been thinking a lot about this, because white people get to be individuals. And that's why there's a lot of dialogue when these tragic murders, these mass shootings happen. They talk about
mental health,
lone wolves and mental health, but lone wolves, right? And so, and I had done a TikTok about this when that mass shooting happened, like food for thought. How many lone wolves before we have a pack? Right. And it's not just about the home life. It's not just about the bullying. right? Because if that were the case,
we'd have black boys and black girls.
we'd have
and white
black
girls.
boys shooting up the school. We'd have girls shooting up the school because they felt bullied. Black boys and boys of color in general shooting up schools because of, racism and being called N-word and all
But
of
the
this
reason
stuff.
the
So
reason
it's
I asked that
one.
question, but the reason I ask it is because we have national conversations about what's happening in the homes of the Black people,
Absolutely.
right?
Right.
And so I'm asking that question, then why are we not having the same conversation about what's happening in their homes that are contributing? I mean, I get your point, but that conversation should be happening. Like there is something more. I mean, we're at the hour, so we don't have time to go into the whole mass shooting issue, but I brought it up more rhetorically about it because my point was about the people who were asking how can they still vote for Donald Trump. And I'm sitting here going, how does a 14-year-old walk into a school and shoot and kill people up? And the dad is still alive walking into the courtroom, where if that was a Black man or a Black child, the coffin would have been on full display on national news. And so, yeah.
And can we just add that they erroneously posted a picture
Of the
of
black
one
boy
of the
who was
Yeah.
black
killed.
boys that was
Yes.
killed
Yeah.
by this shooter
Yeah.
as the shooter.
Yeah.
And so just I believe that the Donald Trump presidency is really, right, this manifestation of white rage, to be
Mhm.
honest, right? So feeling left behind, like how do these people have and I don't have? Um, and so when they talk about it, what is it, the economic anxiety? We can't name it, like, right? So we can't have a conversation about it until we can actually name it. And so the media does an amazing job of dancing around it and biting off the edges, the lone wolves, the people in rural areas with experiencing economic anxiety, like all of these code words, but they won't come out and state it. And that which we can't state, we can't address.
Well, look, I knew this was going to be, and we only barely touched the surface about uh, Vice President Harris's debate last night. What is it, 55 days we have left, 50 something days before. Um, Boy, this is going to be something. Like, I'm just trying to brace for what this is all going to bear, because I frankly don't know what more she can personally do other than what she's doing, which is out campaigning and being in the battleground states and hoping that we turn those electoral votes to her favor. We're in for it if not. So final thoughts from both of you this evening before we wrap up.
I would just encourage people, make sure that you're talking to your family about getting out to vote. My daughter watched her very first presidential debate last night, and we texted back and forth. She's 28 years old, and she's been disengaged, and she's now engaged. And so I would encourage you, reach out to people that you know who have not voted before or who don't think it's important to vote. And I want to encourage you to get people signed up to vote. Especially the younger generation who just feels overwhelmed by it all.
Yeah.
Talk to your neighbors. Make sure
Yeah.
they're registered.
It's a good point. I had a great text conversation with my kids last night too, during that debate too. So it's fun to see our kids get interested to see what's happening here. Steph, did you have some final thoughts?
I am going to call in my white friends in particular. And a lot of what I hear is, oh, well, I don't want to talk about politics at the dinner table because I don't want to ruin the holiday, or so and so is in town. Lean in, right? So ruin the holiday, which the holiday will not be ruined, like it'll be fine. But it's really important to have these conversations and talk about the importance of voting. And also, we know what Vice President Harris stands for beyond, the policy webpage. Like, she's got a whole history of service as a U.S. senator, as a vice president, and presiding over the Senate and tie-breaking votes. It's not an unknown quantity. So please have those conversations.
Thank you, Steph. And to our audience who joined us this evening, thank you for being a part of this. I see quite a bit of you signed on this evening, so we appreciate that you join and engage with us. I think my final words for this evening, I'm personally encouraged right now with Vice President Harris. I'm encouraged by seeing what Erin is doing with Project Kindness. Maybe I would just say, that hashtag be better. Like, can we all just be better? Can we all collaboratively work together to make this world a better place? I just am hoping that I live to see those days where we have a better society for all of us to live in. So thank you for joining us this evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Half that up in sacks, I favor black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for every